children's programming has graced us with countless nostalgic shows over the many years it's been around. Murderous house animals, wholesome education, 20-minute toy commercials, whatever the hell this is. We've seen it all. However, if you grew up having your bookshelves look like this, chances are you were homeschooled, which meant you weren't allowed to watch most, if not all, the shows I just mentioned. SpongeBob? Gay propaganda. Pokemon? More like Pokey Demon.
Here's the next character. This is Misty. She's headstrong and stubborn, constantly arguing with Ash. Typical woman.
And of course, how could we forget about our subliminal mouse overlord? With the idea that Saturday morning cartoons were either going to turn their kids gay or teach them how to open up a portal to the ninth circle of hell, Christian parents in the 90s quickly pulled the plug on secular entertainment and would only ever have it plugged in if the folks over at Focus on the Family said the coast was clear. So what were homeschool kids left to watch?
Then in his darkest hour, the words of a single book began to change his life.
Bible.
And at last, Miles Peterson felt the burning desire to know God. Inspired by the Word of God and equipped with unyielding faith, Miles pledged to fight evil in the name of God as Bible Man.
Now, luckily for myself, my parents were cool and let me watch beyond the limits of Focus on the Family's list of approved programs, which is why I have a lot of fond memories watching SpongeBob, Fairly OddParents, and Ben 10, among many others. I was even allowed to watch the Harry Potter movies, which was a very big no-no in the homeschooling community. My dad also let me watch Lord of the Rings, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Jurassic Park, which my mom did not approve of. Despite my super awesome parents being really cool about the movies and shows I watched, we were still a Christian homeschooled family, so I grew up alternating between VHS tapes of Spider-Man and Bible Man. As you expected, a lot of these shows just weren't good, with the exception of a few like Adventures in Odyssey and Angel Wars, which was actually really cool. A lot of these shows are imprinted on the deepest, darkest corner of my subconscious, whether I like that or not. Some of the shows I hated, like Hermie.
Dear God, I would like a giant raspberry and cabbage leaf swirled ice cream cone.
And I'd like you to get the fuck out of here.
But there was one show that defied it all. A show that didn't come across like your 20-something youth pastor who tried way too hard to be your cool friend and spiritual role model.
Dude.
A show that advertised Sunday morning values with Saturday morning fun and actually delivered. A show about talking vegetables. VeggieTales, for lack of a better term, was the shit for us homeschoolers. The show had two hosts, Bob the Tomato, the anchor and overall mom of the show, and Larry the Cucumber, the lovable goofball and often star. Each episode would begin with Bob and Larry reading a letter sent in by a fan of the show, sharing a personal struggle of theirs, like being bullied, and would ask for the host's advice. Bob and Larry would then play a movie that dealt with those same issues, which would sometimes retell stories from the Bible, parody a popular franchise, or make up its own unique story. After the first act, the show would be put on hold for my favorite segment,
Silly Songs with Larry, the part of the show where Larry comes out and sings a silly song.
The movie would resume and conclude with the characters learning their lessons and, more often than not, a celebratory musical number. Bob and Larry would return, talk about the morals of the story, read a Bible verse pertaining to said moral, and finally end with the wholesome affirmation,
God made you special, and he loves you very much.
This formula, though repetitive, was incredibly successful and was like crack to my 5-year-old brain. If we went to Family Christian Bookstore, you better believe I begged my mom to buy me 3 VeggieTales DVDs, the Larry Mobile, and Bob and Larry Sing the 70s. I was so obsessed with VeggieTales that my mom somehow once got Tim Hodge, the director of multiple VeggieTales episodes, on the phone to talk to me while we lived in a third world country. Fun fact, if you ever wondered why they never parodied Star Wars, it's probably because I suggested the idea to him, which if I remember correctly, could somehow implicate the studio into some weird copyright laws. So you have 7-year-old me to thank for that. Point is, I loved VeggieTales, and remember it being just as good as the other shows I watched when I was a little Christian boy. But truth be told, I'm not a little Christian boy anymore. I'm an agnostic adult with Eastern-leaning spiritual beliefs and haven't seen an episode of VeggieTales since I was, 12? Which probably doesn't even count because it was on in the background at a friend's house. I have, of course, rewatched episodes of SpongeBob and can confirm, it's as good as I remember.
But Nineveh!
My childhood memory hasn't always been the most accurate judge for the quality of TV and movies, so I honestly don't know if VeggieTales is as good as I'm remembering. So I decided to revisit it. It all began in 1993 with Where's God When I'm Scared, and I went back to this one with the fond and fresher memories of the more polished and refined episodes of the early to mid 2000s, where the pace was quick, the writing was clever, and the themes were fitting. Instead, I was met with primitive 3D animation, a slow anxiety-inducing pace, and questionable execution of themes, which when combined with my nostalgia from watching this when I was a toddler, creates an existential atmosphere that fits rather nicely with this episode's theme. So yeah, the animation's super weird, but it's important to keep in mind that this was made during the dawn of 3D computer animation. Previous to the episode's debut, the only uses of 3D animation that were in the public eye at the time was the music video of Money for Nothing and 2 short films made by Pixar, a company that had been bought by Steve Jobs from Lucasfilm, which was employed by veterans of the entertainment industry. Meanwhile, this was made by 3 guys fresh out of Bible college.
Hi Phil, how you doing?
Welcome to Big Idea Productions. I'm Bob the Tomato. I'll be your host today.
In a pre-Toy Story world, VeggieTales was revolutionary, and the fact that the first episodes were only made by a few guys struggling to pay rent is impressive. Unfortunately, it's terrifying.
What are you gonna do?
I'm going to call the police.
The episodes that followed are also filled with really weird things, like Bob and Larry escaping communist Russia, a toy massacring a helpless penguin, and a religious extremist with control over the workforce who makes his employees, all of whom who work on minimum wage, mind you, worship his god or else they are ostracized and burned at the stake. Okay, I made up the bit about communist Russia and the penguin, but that last bit about the capitalist cult leader is 100% a real episode.
Oh, that was beautiful. I'm gonna be singing that song myself as I throw you into the furnace.
These episodes are weird and darker than I remember, but in all honesty, that's part of the charm. While they lack the signature formula and pace of the later episodes, they make up for it with the silly songs. You got a Where's My Hairbrush where Larry realizes he's bald.
Why do you need a hairbrush? You don't have any hair.
Larry is taken aback. The thought had never occurred to him.
The Song of the Dancing Cucumber, Love My Lips where Larry goes to therapy for kissing his aunt who had a beard.
And it felt weird.
My, she had a beard and it felt weird.
She had a beard.
Oh.
And Oh Santa where Larry commits tax evasion. It quickly became apparent to the guys fresh out of Bible college, also known as Big Idea, that they had hit gold with the niche market that is homeschooled evangelical families and were destroying the competition, which, as we previously covered, was not good.
Hi kids.
Demand for VHS tapes of religious vegetables was high, which meant more money for Big Idea, which in turn meant higher quality episodes, which in another turn ushered in
Won't you take me to Funky Town?
Josh and the Big Wall,
Great success.
Madam Blueberry.
Great success.
Every episode from this era was a
Great success.
The musical numbers were catchier, the animation improved, and the lessons went from forgive those who make fun of you to if you end up a queen because you're the hottest virgin on the block, try to persuade the king from committing mass genocide against your people.
You ought to be sent to the island of perpetual tickling along with anyone else who dares scheme against my queen and her family.
Great success.
This is the issue with adapting stories from the Bible for children. The Bible, or at least the Old Testament, is not exactly family friendly.
There she lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys, and whose emission was like that of horses.
Oh!
Behind all the repackaged Sunday school stories we grew up with are very disturbing and even barbaric accounts. Like, for example, not too long before the events of Josh and the Big Wall, God commands the Israelites to murder all the men, women, and children of a tribe, and for the Israelite soldiers to keep the young virgin girls for themselves as slaves. Which means the character this adorable cucumber is portraying had underage sex slaves, which makes me feel really uncomfortable. That's not to say the Bible doesn't have beautiful stories with profound insights that are empowering and relevant, because it absolutely does. It's just that it's weird to see a show aimed at 5-year-olds retell the story of when King David used his power to force a woman to have sex with him against her consent, and then murdered her husband when she got pregnant to hide his sin, for which God punished him by killing the baby once it was born. Granted, Big Idea swaps out the woman with a rubber ducky and sex with taking a bath, but still, it's a little weird.
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
Besides the odd religious choices, the show really is at its best here. There's a skit about hoarding resources that is extremely relevant today.
The Englishman who went up the hill and came down with all the bananas.
Hello, I am the Englishman who went up a hill and came down with all the bananas, leaving, of course, the inhabitants of the hill with no bananas, and therefore bestowing the term selfish upon myself.
There's also a lot of meta jokes and references that obviously went over my head when I was a little kid. Of course, not every joke lands, but it's certainly funnier than Hermie.
Windstorm. I like that name.
No, Hermie, it's a real windstorm.
But the comedic highlight is once again the silly songs. You have Song of the Cebu, where Larry puts on a sequential image stereophonic multimedia event about Cebus, but completely fails, thus leaving his audience and producer utterly disappointed in him.
I want my money back.
And it's because of this failure that in the next episode, Larry's producer cancels Silly Songs Forever and replaces it with Love Songs with Mr. Lunt, who sang about a gourd in love with a cheeseburger but has an adulterous affair with a half-price meal of eggs and bacon over at Denny's. And no joke, from what my mom tells me, at the time of its release, it was quite controversial among some parents in the homeschooling community. After losing his job,
Silly Songs is cancelled until further notice.
Larry becomes an alcoholic.
Wanna talk about it?
But when everyone has a little weed, it gets paranoid.
Don't look at his eyes! They're laser beams!
There's only one hero to save the day.
I am that hero!
Larry Boy delivers takeout. I'm sorry. I've been stuck in quarantine doing nothing but watching VeggieTales and playing God of War 2, and I think it's starting to affect my mental health.
How long have I been here? How long have I suffered this curse? I truly do not know.
As I was saying, these Christian vegetables sure are funny this time around, and as for Big Idea, business was good. So good, in fact, that animators who had worked on Mulan and Lion King were leaving Disney to work at Big Idea. Critics were raving, kids were laughing, parents were buying, VeggieTales was unstoppable, and with their first feature-length film around the corner, as well as 2 new shows and even talk for a theme park, Big Idea was on track to become Christian Disney. Then they filed for bankruptcy in 2003.
It's so funky, it's so funky.
Sometime around 1997, co-writer and voice of Larry the Cucumber, Mike Naraki, wrote a full-length feature film out of what was originally supposed to be just a 45-minute VeggieTales episode. CEO Phil Vischer read it, said,
"This some serious gourmet shit."
Asked his fellow higher-ups if it was financially possible, they said yep, and so the film was greenlit with a $7 million budget. That's when the last head of the animation studio left Big Idea and went directly into therapy. According to Phil Vischer's book on the matter, they were not the first executive to do so. You see, not everyone who worked at Big Idea shared the same beliefs, but there were those who believed everyone should, so they would evangelize and debate during work hours, which led to a lot of professionals leaving the company during production and into several months of therapy. Jonah went far into production without anyone managing it until finally Big Idea hired a couple of industry veterans to produce and run the studio. But because of the time spent without anyone overseeing the project, department leaders just hired extra animators to help with the film, which meant that $7 million budget jumped to $10 million. Also, as it turns out, sales weren't going as well as his fellow higher-ups had previously said, and they really didn't have the money for the movie, which was now $20 million over budget. To raise money, Big Idea sold their distribution rights, which got them the $20 million they needed. What the film made went straight to the distributors, which left Big Idea with
Nothing. Zilch. Nada.
well, that and an $11 million lawsuit for selling their distribution rights, which Lyric Studios kinda had. So Big Idea lost the lawsuit, filed for bankruptcy in 2003, and was bought by Classic Media. Phil Vischer would remain at Big Idea with no creative control, only to write 1 VeggieTales episode script a year and voice his characters. Now surprisingly, the quality of the show didn't immediately drop off. In fact, the first batch of episodes following Jonah were actually some of the best in the series. Wonderful World of Autotainment predicted modern internet humor to a T.
In the future, entertainment will be randomly generated.
Randomly generated?
Randomly generated.
Randomly generated jokes? Randomly generated emotions? This is a big mess!
I'm sorry, Bob. I was sure this was going to be the great new way to entertain kids and teach them nice lessons.
Oh, like how to tell nonsense jokes and be emotionally unstable?
Well,
The Ballad of Little Joe had a spot-on parody of early 2000s boy band music videos, which is probably the funniest thing Big Idea ever did. However, as the show went on, its quality would decline. The episodes began to feel less like parodies of popular IPs and more like cheap, watered-down retellings. The silly songs became less memorable, the show just felt lifeless, and I think it's because it lost its heart. And I don't just mean Phil Vischer's creative control. I mean all the staff who had either left or were fired because of the catastrophe that was Jonah's production. The show would continue to decline until they finally reached rock bottom with VeggieTales.
In the house!
I may no longer be the targeted demographic, but this just isn't it. They made Bob a mischievous schemer, canceled silly songs for good this time, and now everyone looks like VeggieTales anime fan art. It's surreal to see a show start off so humbly, hit critical and commercial success, grow a team of seasoned animators from Disney, file for bankruptcy at its peak, and steadily decline into this.
Won't you take me to Funky Town?
Now even though my beliefs have changed since I last watched this show and that I'm no longer its target audience, I'm extremely grateful that I grew up with it. Is it as great as I remember? The silly songs certainly are, but as for the episodes themselves, not quite. But regardless, revisiting the series was fun, and it reminded me of a lot of special childhood memories, like singing silly songs in long car rides, dancing to the Mushu, and quoting memorable lines with my friends and family. Hell, that's something I still do to this day.
Is the boy injured?
And I never would have enjoyed that experience had it not been for the hard work Big Idea put into the making of the show. So if anyone who worked at Big Idea is watching this, thank you.
Well, we're out of time for today.
So remember, kids,
God made you special.
and he loves you very much.
Goodbye!